those of you who are not familiar with the Coady Institute, its origins are really in the 1930s, when the cooperative movement and the credit union movement was forged through the efforts of many, but including Moses Coady, after whom the Institute is named. We have since done a lot of work internationally, and we produced a book called From Clients to Citizens, which was mainly about citizen organizing in the Global South. And we were asked after that to see if we could also produce something that was more dedicated to the North American context. So that's the background to the book. And of course, when we started the book in 2008, 2009, there was a lot of concern about the economic crisis at that time. And as you well know, we have seen a growing inequality with much less control at the local level over the last several decades. I think you'll be familiar with the Oxfam report that says that 62 people earn the same as half the globe population. You'll also have seen the fallout from the Panama Papers that draws attention to these kinds of inequalities and their consequences. We've also seen in the last few decades more attention being given to the racialized patterns of exclusion, whether this is in the race riots in the United States or whether it's the ongoing issues with our indigenous population in Canada. As a result, we know that there are many citizen-led movements that are striving to find a new economy. And many of these movements are emerging from those very populations who've been most marginalized by the mainstream economy. And also we're seeing, of course, migration and displacement as the casualties of the mainstream economy, whether this is internationally or locally. So I think if we move on to the next slide, what we started this book with was a set of questions. We really wanted to find out how it was that people started to see themselves as citizens, active citizens, mobilizing to bring about change in their communities. And then we wanted to see how those efforts that started at the community level began to grow and link more people in, build alliances, building coalitions, so that these initially very grassroots efforts were able to contribute to larger systems change. And finally, even more ambitious, could we learn something from these examples that would help us to understand how mobilizing of citizens can take on the challenge of a new economy at a more global scale? So what we tried to do then was find a wide variety of cases that would give us clues to answering these questions. And as you can see from the map, we have quite a wide variety indicated there. We have 6 Canadian cases, 5 American cases. We've got a mix of rural and urban cases. And we wanted to make sure that we also had cases that were representative of the ethnic diversity in both the United States and Canada. So that's why we have the example of the Ontario Federation of Friendship Centres and the case featuring the efforts made among the Inuit to find a culturally meaningful livelihood in a rapidly changing Arctic environment. It's why we have African American cases in Alabama and North Carolina, both about retrieving cultural identity and a rural livelihood. We have examples of urban innovations in community building and renewal in the downtown cores of Buffalo and San Diego, as well as in the neighborhood of new immigrants in Montreal. And that's what this webinar is going to be focusing on. So you can see that is mapped on this slide. Let's go on to the next one. So just to give you a clearer idea of the cases in the collection, we're starting off therefore with the Quebec case, Vivre Saint Michele en Santé, You'll see the other Canadian cases there in yellow, a social enterprise, New Dawn Enterprises in Nova Scotia, the coalition of the Greater Edmond Alliance trying to secure was trying to protect agricultural land from urban expansion. And the EcoTrust case, which is really where we got our title from, Building the Conservation Economy. Without wanting to go through the whole list, I think the best thing now is to turn you over to Jean and Brianne, who are going to talk specifically about what we learned from the story of Vivre Saint Michele en Santé in Quebec.
Great, thank you so much, Alison. Just for those of you who aren't French speakers, Vivre Saint Michele en Santé means for a healthy Saint Michel. And this is a neighborhood of new and established immigrants of 60,000 people in the northeast end of Montreal in the province of Quebec. Now, I called my case study humility and audacity because I think these two words are a perfect description for the approach that Vivre Saint Michele en Santé, or VSMS in short, why it's been so successful. The organization deliberately takes an audacious and ambitious approach, tackling multiple issues at once: poverty, housing, security, culture, recreation, education. But there's also a humility and pragmatic side to those who are dedicated to improving the neighborhood. To listen to people with very divergent viewpoints, not easy, coming from all over the world, and to learn and to make compromises if it means that things will change. So what does this case in particular add to this collection of case studies? The first thing is that I think it points to an obvious but often neglected point about the importance of investing in process if long-term change is to be sustainable. I also think that it shows that paying attention to process is a really important way to build community and active citizenship among a diverse group of people from around the world, which then over time builds a sense of loyalty and pride in the community, leading people not only to see this community or this neighborhood as a stepping stone to a better life, which is what it was known as, but as a place to call home. And fourth, and sort of more broadly, Quebec is a province that is a world leader in supporting and promoting the involvement of civil society in the delivery of services. There are many progressive policies and programs at play. And the reasons behind this is that these services are contextual, they are relevant, they are community owned, and this is sort of an indication of the social economy where Quebec is a world leader, and this is all very positive. But there are also some drawbacks in terms of limited funding and volunteer and community burnout. And the last thing I guess I'll say that I think is unique about this case is sort of what I call the X factor. A confluence of really contextual factors, largely to do with the personalities involved, that allowed this neighborhood to move forward. So just to give you a little bit of context, my case study takes place in the province of Quebec, which, as many of us know, is, and some don't. I know we have some participants in my class from around the world that are listening in right now, so hello to them. But Quebec is a unique context in Canada. As the only province with a French-speaking majority, it's had to hold its own to preserve its identity in a predominantly English-speaking country. The province has a long history of social and political movements, community organizing, and a cooperative sector dating back to the early 1900s. What's interesting about this case, though, is that the majority of people who live in Saint Michel don't share this history. They've come to Canada from various parts of the world, from Italy, from Haiti, from Southeast Asia, Central and South America, and more recently, Northwestern Africa. and they have their own histories of organizing around social and political issues. In addition to being known, positively as one of the most ethnically diverse in the city, but it's also, Saint Michele is known for poverty and unemployment. And one of the major drawing points to Saint Michele originally back in the day was employment post-World War II in two large quarries which both closed by 1984 and subsequently became a dump for the city's waste and storage for the snow removal from the rest of the city. And this really made residents feel like they were, the poubelle or the garbage can of Montreal. Today, the dump and the snow removal sites are slated to become one of the largest green spaces in North America. But at the time of writing this case study, they were instead slated to become a composting plant located close to housing districts nearby. And additional lack of urban planning led to a massive highway constructed right through the neighborhood. And the neighborhood was really perceived to be a stepping stone to a better life. Most people who were there or who moved there rarely stayed more than 5 years. So in this, here are some pictures of the low-income housing and the quarries and the dumps and the beautiful highway that divides Saint Michele. So in 1991, about 200 people who lived in Saint Michele and outside of Saint Michele gathered to discuss how they could address some of these issues of transiency, issues of crime and poverty in the neighborhood, which then inaugurated Saint Michele's participation in the World Health Organization's Healthy Cities program, which was intended to provide spaces for citizens to discuss and act on issues of common concern. The program was locally promoted by the City of Montreal, the Ministry of Health, and by Centraide, or the United Way in English. The meeting also led to the creation of VSMS, so Vivre Saint Michele en Santé, to coordinate and support a number of roundtables or action groups charged with designing specific actions to help the residents of Saint Michele to turn things around. The organization or the movement has close to 50 members from both Saint Michele and other parts of Montreal. Some people are individual citizens acting as volunteers, and some are staff of organizations engaged in Saint Michele. And collectively, they are dedicated to supporting the neighborhood's revitalization. So when I was there, I asked the members who lived in Saint Michele what the role of this organization is, and I got lots of responses. People would say it's a coordinator of community action, or an information hub, or a networker, or a reference point for government institutions and donors, a catalyzer, a community building work camp, that's my favorite, and a responsive investor, not just financially, in community activity. And I think the organizations, their flexibility and their ability to take on multiple roles are really part of its beauty. And so as you can see on the screen, this vision articulated later in 2004 was Saint Michele, a pleasant neighborhood within which to live, supportive of family life and multicultural exchanges, an active and unified community which takes charge of its affairs and also contributes to the vigor of Montreal. Now they also, the VSMS took on 3 priorities and 2 strategies. So the priorities were employment, housing, and access to services more broadly. And the strategies, as I said, they deliberately worked on many issues all at once in roundtables or action groups. And they wholeheartedly put citizen participation at the center of everything that they took on. And so that's really what this story and what this webinar is about, citizen participation and how to create community and inclusion and active citizenship in an urban place that would not necessarily call itself a community. And so to do this, I'm going to pass it over to Jean, but just to give you a bit of an overview, you know, Jean describes it as a sort of a four-pronged strategy where trying to move people from thinking individually at the I to thinking as us and we, and then ultimately together. And so they really put an emphasis on creating citizen spaces. It could be by, you know, going door to door. It could be through collective information offered, cultural, political, formal, informal. They also supported collective citizen initiative, different committees, and they were and ultimately supported the capacity of local leaders. So I'm going to turn it over to Jean for a few minutes to describe these strategies in more detail and to give you maybe a few examples of their work in practice.
Thanks, Brianne. Maybe as a preamble, I should say that because of the very fact that the population living in Saint Michele comes from a number of countries, just the term citizen is already a problem, in as much as a lot of them say, well, I am a refugee, I have resident status, or I have no status, can I take part in this? So the very notion of citizenship is a challenge right from the start. A lot of people that are there are fleeing from countries where there was political turmoil and dictatorship, so it's not obvious the way that they will actually take part in these activities. So she said the process is extremely important, and it is. Sometimes I say the process is even a result in itself, and it's still backed by those two strategies of empowerment, really, empowerment of individuals, empowerment of organizations, and empowerment of the whole community. And just to say that in acting at once on a number of issues, we've added over the years, of course, food security, and food co-ops are starting to burgeon all over the place. Culture as a product, and culture as a means of expression and development. For a lot of people, that's the first chance that they have to value their backgrounds, value the countries that they came from. So culture and access to culture is extremely important. Urban planning, you saw the pictures, is also another priority we added, and urban security. Though the idea that gangs roam everywhere is, you know, overdone, obviously, there still are issues, and every time there's a drive-by shooting, obviously people come back to that fear, and security, urban security is therefore an issue. So it's anything but linear. It's more circular, it's back and forth, but the first principle is really outreach, going where people are, where they live, where they gather, where they shop. It might be outside schools, it might be outside daycare centers, outside a merchant's shop that serves as a forum, a coffee shop. So it's really labor intensive. You see here on the first picture actually a city councillor going door to door to have a petition sign against this composting factory in the park. It took only 9 months to convince him that this was a valued citizen issue. So just to say it's time-wise. The first principle, therefore, is reaching out to where citizens are. That's the beginning of the I. And the I also comes in form of people coming with very individual perceptions of their problems. And you have to understand that. So we've developed these citizen spaces in 4 grassroots organizations that are in sort of micro neighborhoods, because as Brianne said, the neighborhood is really cut up in various pieces. So the first sense of ownership might be a few blocks. It might be 300 or 1,000 households, not more. And door to door is therefore important. potluck activities, and just the beginning of a NUS, therefore, that they can refer to. It might be the neighbors, it might be the people living next door, it might be the family that has children going to the same school, but that second step is extremely important. And collective information, the beginning of the US, is to just organize events, coffees, workshops, parties, evening discussions, conferences. Culture is used, as I said, as a medium to value those countries where most of the residents come from, and it's a form of expression. To give you an example, a youth forum will not feel very comfortable writing a memoir for a city government or a provincial government, but they can write a rap, or they can sing a song or dance or play a sketch that will illustrate exactly what they want. And so their form of expression is extremely important to recognize. So that's the first collective. Here you see a meeting of a broad citizen that was a broad citizen forum that was deciding on our strategic planning for the next 4 years, from 14 to 18. So that's a more formal example. Here you find a less formal example, but that to me is a very important indicator of success. You have here, the scene is in a low-income housing that's bordered by a lot of small workers, mostly Italian, who've been here for 40, 50 years, who bought a house, and who were always living in fear of vandalism and drug dealings and gangs because they were in front of a major low-income housing project. So this idea of a neighborhood party where you have generations, classes, and people of all origins coming and bringing some food and dancing together is just an example of the type of things, very small things that you do. Just to give you another example, you had in the scene one of the first Italian leaders that is now doing door-to-door in the low-income housing, and who's like the grandfather for all these small kids. And at first they were in, literally warfare together. So that's, in my mind, a very important indicator of success. So that second step is important to lead, to have that space express their actual needs. It might be housing, it might be public safety, it might be traffic. There's some major arteries, obviously, so kids are always in fear of being run over. And so the idea is that these collective occasions to bring people together are a chance for them to express their needs and the issues on which they would be ready to start working together. And that can be a very long process, and that's where the organizers that are part-time, that are often former citizens with very little professional qualifications, will start mobilizing people around an issue and help them and accompany them in defining a collective issue. When I say collective, again, it's at the level of a very minor or small sector of the neighborhood. It might be a few blocks. It might be all around the park, or the need for sports installations. But it's really listening, and that's where the humility comes in, listening to what their needs are, and the audacity to bring them together, to give them tools, but not give them the project, the idea. And you have here an example of a tenant association that was set up in a low-income project. Actually, that tenant association is from a mostly family low-income housing, but it used the seniors' home to have their first meeting because they had no locale to make it. So that's also the intergenerational, interclass, and interethnic collaboration, you might say. If you look at the last step, and again, this is anything but circular, it's the constant support and coaching of that leadership that emerges slowly from these formal or less formal gatherings. And Citizen Leadership Laboratory is an example of what we set up. It's basically training in public speaking, running meetings, small groups or public assembly, and mobilization. So you're dealing with people who want to improve their neighborhoods, who want to get involved, and who want to learn and to get better tools as they emerge from very informal gatherings. We have a lot of occasions where we want to recognize these citizens. As a matter of fact, this evening I'm going to a formal borough celebration of volunteers, citizens who got involved, whatever their origins and whatever their involvement. March 8th is another event initiated, obviously, to recognize the achievements of women in the neighborhood. And this coaching, again, brings them closer to citizenship. Again, citizenship is not obvious for a lot of the people in the neighborhood, considering the countries they come from. You saw the borough council or city council, or before doing door-to-door support, obviously that took a lot of pressure, it took a lot of lobbying, it took a lot of collective demonstrations even to and petitions to have them move and support the citizens, but it's put in the light of a normal democratic process, and that's where the coaching is important, and the demystifying citizenship is extremely important, and having them not afraid to get involved in the democratic process is extremely important. So what can we, and you have here again a formal ceremony. The mayor, the borough mayor is the woman in the top, the last row in white there. So that shows you the involvement of elected members, and they'll open their offices more and more to citizens, and even the civil servants no longer just refuse talking to citizens. They take citizens much more seriously, and it's a win-win situation. You see here an old Italian worker who's a leader in his own area of the neighborhood giving a series of petitions to the city councilor. So that's a borough council office. If we move on, I think we have the sort of the end of the process, but it's a long and tedious process, as I said, and it's a to and fro process, back and forth, and but the whole idea is to bring all these small spaces that have sort of a beginning sense of ownership over a small part of the neighborhood to think broadly and to think of the overall neighborhood, and that's not very easy. And we have broader events more and more, like mobilization around the composting factory, but the Festival of Nations, which happens always in the summer, to bring all these nations and to show culturally and with food, with music, with dance, with play, the vast richness that we have in the neighborhood. So that's, again, the process of going from an I, where people come with very personal interests, thinking that they're the only ones with that problem, to beginning us, which is really small. It sometimes plays also on even the country of origin. Without creating ghettos, there's a pride in the neighborhood or the village that they come from. The we is more action-oriented. We can do something. Yes, we can. And that's where we try to bring them, give them more information on what can be done, how the democratic process works, and how things have been achieved in other countries that can serve as example, or other neighborhoods. And finally, together, that's the real main challenge of bringing all these small we's or small groups of citizens in working together to improve the neighborhood. So that's an example of a demonstration where In the front line, you have the borough mayor holding the banner, and again, it took many months to convince them to support that issue, but the relationship is very good. If you pursue on the heavy theory behind the mobilization, PPP, so you have to recognize the push of the problem. If people don't see that there's something that they want to change, be it housing or security or access to food, to culture, it's much more difficult. So you have to have them, give them an occasion to express their needs, their problems, their challenges. The pull of the hope of change, yes, we can. That's, again, where the organizers play a very important role in supporting that and showing that it is possible. There are means, there are ways. And of course, the whole thing has to be a fun process. We talked that process is important. If it's a very formal and institutional type of process where they can't speak, where they feel that they don't have the ability to influence decisions and to take part in it and to be recognized in whatever they bring to it, be it a ability to speak or to just do some technical and logistic support, you won't get anywhere. So it has to be fun. Another way of putting this fancy theory of PPP is FFF. So it's funds, it's fun, and it's faith. Faith in the future and faith and hope of being able to improve. On that, I think, Brianne, you will show. And what does that all that work achieve in terms of actual hard data and results?
Mm-hmm. Well, as you can see on the screen, I mean, I think you can definitely see a lot of areas that have been tangibly and concretely improved as a result of the, you know, the deliberate process that the SMS has supported for the last 20-some years. But, you know, in terms of proximity of daycares and, you know, recreational activities for children and youth, you know, more than a 10% improvement. You know, I mean, you can read these recreational activities for adults. Safety has improved, and people aren't only residing in Saint Michele because of the low cost of rent and the availability of housing, but more for the you know, ease of integration. It's seen as a hub that welcomes immigrants and the availability of way more services than in the past. And people are choosing, more people are choosing to stay. So I think that the you know, I think the process has been really important, and it's resulted in a much improved neighborhood. Now, this isn't to say that there haven't been challenges, and I think those that are experienced by VSMS are also ones that we can all relate to. You know, the first being professionalizing a grassroots movement. You know, as something that started out as a real you know, a grassroots movement. As momentum built and activities became more complex and sophisticated, you often required people with more formal expertise and formal education to deal with funders and reporting, for example. And oftentimes these people came from outside of Saint Michele. And some people felt like, you know, as they got bigger and momentum grew, that they started to lose that sort of grassroots feel and citizen-led feel of ASMS. Second is the balance between, you know, empowerment and citizen-led for people to take action for themselves in a variety of areas that do overlap with the state, but not, again, letting the state off the hook for their obligations. And so, you know, just what is that balance? And then finally is this point about humility, which is one of the reasons that VSMS has come so far. But and their pragmatic approach has enabled them, you know, to find a sort of common denominator that brings people of diverse backgrounds and interests and sectors together to make things happen, both within Saint Michele and with outside partners. But sometimes people felt like this kind of compromising collaboration across sectors, introduced some ethical dilemmas for some of the VSMS members. And, I think, as someone said, it's a matter of distinguishing between, compromise and compromising. So there have been some challenges. But I think I will, I guess to sum it all up, I had sort of mentioned an X factor and sort of the takeaway, my major takeaway among many from VSMS was really sort of despite the multi-pronged vision and ambitious action plan of VSMS, the simplicity and the humility of their approach is something that I really took away. And they've really demonstrated that community building as a concept can be quite basic, and it doesn't take years of formal professional education to understand, and nor does it necessarily require a rich natural resource base or political clout or adequate physical infrastructure or wealth, although each and all of these factors would help. But it does take people with experience, with patience and passion, both inside and outside the neighborhood, who are willing to invest in a very deliberative process over the long term, oftentimes outside of office hours and above and beyond what donors will pay for or job descriptions can possibly capture. And this is what I think is the sort of irreplaceable X factor of VSMS. And it's messy and it's heavy and it requires constant FaceTime and phone calls. But in this case, there's really no substitute. But what I think that we can take away from their experience is that this can happen in any community. So I think what I will do is leave it there and pass it over to Alison for one last comment.
Well, thank you. It's I've heard that story a few times, and of course read the case study as I was one of the editors, and it continues to be an incredible example. In large measure because it illustrates so well the length of time that's involved, the commitment, the sustained effort, the tenacity that really is indicative of all of these cases in this collection. So it's one of many positive examples. Do these together add up to significant change? Well, what we believe is that all these cases are examples of building power and building citizen voice from below, prizing open some more spaces for citizen involvement in decision-making that affects their lives. These cases also give us a new window on what it means to have wealth and the importance of cultivating multiple forms of wealth, not just income, but also cultural wealth, social wealth, natural wealth, and so on. The innovation is often not only, well, it's social innovation, different ways of organizing, different ways of leading, different ways of connecting, different ways of using technology to enhance that connectivity. All of the cases are in some way, shape, or form planting the seeds of a new economy. Perhaps if we saw them as an aggregate, we would see all the ingredients of that new economy. Certainly what we do know is that we can't operate in silos anymore. These community development and building a new economy is not going to be done by one sector alone, but by significant relationships between government, private sector, and civil society sectors. And our job is to find these connectors, these gappers, as John McKnight and Jody Kretzmann would call them. And only then are we in a position to really exert the pressure that is going to be necessary for broader systems change. So I'll leave it at that. I want you to have some time to ask us all questions. And I did leave a link there for those of you who might be interested in buying the book.
Thank you, Alison. And we'll make sure that there's a link also included in the follow-up email to today's call when we send the recording. So thank you for that wonderful summary. This is absolutely an impactful and inspiring case study of how, deliberate grassroots organizing and engagement can really lead to big change. And I'm sure there's a number of you on the line who have questions, and I would encourage you now to type those in through the chat box for Jean or Alison or Brianne to answer. And my colleague Natasha will collect those and we'll announce them shortly. But in the meantime, we did receive some questions in advance of today's webinar. So I'm just going to start with those. So the first one is, how can youth become engaged in permaculture-inspired homesteading to create security in local food, energy, and carbon-neutral housing? Quite specific.
I'm going to answer that because I'm assuming it's a general question, not specific to the SMS case. And I will say
I couldn't answer it, Alison. Yeah, you can answer much better than I could ever.
Well, I think that there are many case studies in this collection that are harnessing that interest of young people and the more general population in, first of all, stimulating a local economy, second of all, reducing dependence on the global food distribution system, and reconnecting with the land in ways that really are affirming of people's identity and culture oftentimes. So I think that young people's involvement in this is very significant. If you look at there's one case in rural Appalachia, there's certainly several cases in the American South where this issue of attracting people back to the land and re-engaging them in the local food economy is given a lot of play. I will say that, again, as with the VSMS example, where these have been successful, it has taken a considerable amount of time, and it's an ongoing project. But again, linking, so what are your local restaurants buying for food in terms of their food source? What are your local culinary institutions doing to train young people in cooking local food? What are your schools doing in terms of ensuring that the sourcing of their food is local and organic? These are the other places where action needs to happen so that young people have a really sort of viable future in an organic and permaculture type of agricultural production.
Thank you, Alison. Another question that came through was particularly, I think, someone looking for information about data or metrics that demonstrate efficacy and barriers to citizen-led innovation. Could one of you speak to that?
Brianne?
John, I think we
talked
about. No, you go ahead.
Okay. We're in the process of a continuing evaluation, and we're trying to do exactly that in a participatory fashion. So it isn't easy, and it's a long and tedious process. I think I would just say that you have to distinguish between what we call often objective and observations, objective information, and the more subjective or appreciative type of information. And we're trying to identify more than numbers. Obviously, all the funders are asking us for very specific things like how many meetings, how long, how many people were there, what are they able to demonstrate in terms of learning after that meeting. But I guess the challenge is to balance that type of data that's not just objective and quantified, but it's also qualitative. And that's where the importance of the process as an indicator of a long-term systemic change is for us something that we want to try to document. So we're involved right now in a long-term continuing evaluation process. Maybe I'll stop there, Brianne.
No, I don't have anything to add. That's fine.
Okay.
Well, there is another question here, and I don't know, Jean, if maybe you want to speak to this, because it goes back to a little bit to what you were saying in terms of the need to bring humility into the conversation, into the process. And so someone was wondering about, what do you recommend in the case where perhaps your empathy or that humility or that approach is not welcome?
And that happens, obviously, and I guess the first thing you have to accept is that you keep on offering those seeds. You keep on planting those seeds of information, of open invitations, and you keep on planting those invitations in different areas, different contexts. People are different people in different contexts. I'll give you an example. When we do door-to-door, a lot of people are just plainly afraid. If we meet them in the shop next door in the local restaurant, they'll be much more open to understanding or to speaking with us to try to get a better idea of what are the types of events or resources or services or groups of people that could interest that person. So I think the issue of lack of empathy will come from individuals and from groups, and there are cycles. Some people will say, I don't want to have anything to do with that issue, and but if you have another issue that I really find worthwhile for me, I have 2 kids, I'm looking for a job, then call me again. So you have to plant a lot of seeds, you have to keep the meetings open-ended and build it and they will come, and obviously you have to build a lot before they will come in great numbers, and we know that. That's where the humility of keeping on doing things and keeping doors open. And again, with organizations and people that come from totally different organizational cultures, will not necessarily appreciate the type of leadership that we want to offer, which is much more horizontal and democratic. And maybe just to give an idea, make a link with what Brianne was saying, it's that meeting of the experience and the passion, and being able to understand what the passion is. And we have a good example of that just recently, an open forum for citizens to try to develop better means to mobilize different people. And we had testimonies that exemplified that passion. And that passion was something that could break a lot of the lack of empathy that maybe professionals would receive. So that's where you have to use those very citizens to help you mobilize. It's not just a professional thing, and that's where I think the partnership between the passion, the experience, and the local experience of people living on a daily life will help eventually break the barrier of lack of empathy. But obviously, you're not going to win everybody all the time.
Mm-hmm. And I guess in particular related to that, there's, so many of us are interested in getting our municipalities involved and not always knowing the best way to do that. So can you speak a little bit to how you got the borough elected officials involved, and was there resistance at first?
A lot of resistance. On just the issue of composting, they were on the side of the central cities plan to have that composting plant, which didn't even recognize the provincial and federal bylaws on where it could be. Finally, the plant ended up in an industrial park where it should be. But just to say, it took more than 9 months for local councillors to realize that, hey, we're maybe on the wrong side of this issue, and maybe we didn't understand. And even us as professionals, as you say, Brianne, that live sometimes outside the neighborhood, we thought the idea of a composting factory was really great and it should happen. And we're one of the first neighborhoods in the whole of the city to try out with this composting on a domestic level. So it wasn't on the principle, it was on the idea that historically it wasn't not in my backyard, is that our backyard is already full we've been that quarry to build the city. We've been that dump to help the city. We had this symbolic part, the symbol of revitalization was so important, and here you say, whoops, sorry, we changed our mind, we'll build a composting factory with the trucks, with the dirt, with the smell, etc. So I think we used, again, not the hope, but the experiences of other cities. That's more the rational arguments. And we used the people power. And local politicians are quite sensitive to those people who will vote. And seniors got involved. And seniors had this understanding of the history of the neighborhood, of the profound hurt that they still had over that image and the strong hope that they had over this new part. So I think that's what made it, that's what brought about the change in the local elected members' idea of it. It's when they understand the historical background of this, this part that was really a symbol of the future and a new beginning. And of course, seniors vote, so councillors listen. So petitions, often going to city council, often going to borough councils, and when we were talking about this laboratory on citizen leadership, imagine spending half a day just to coin a question that will, get the point across, and have people get up the courage to bring that question themselves. I would never speak on my own on any council meeting, of course. So it's a long process.
It's a long process.
And we now have partners within the local elected members.
Wonderful. Well, I think we have time for maybe one more quick question if we can do this in a minute. And that is, Tara Mahoney has a question around what resources are needed to support this kind of an effort, right? In collective impact, we talk about a backbone infrastructure or an organization. There's funding requirements. So can you speak to a little bit about what were those necessary supports in order to mobilize this kind of organization? That's
anything but easy. That's the major challenge, I think, for that part of the whole roundtable action plan. It's the citizen mobilization. Nothing funds it. So we're always asking private foundations, sometimes sort of small help from United Way, local merchants. It's not as sexy as giving food handouts to poor families somehow. And it's a long process, so those results are not obviously evident for most people. So funding is a problem. I'm very part-time. My own salary is the equivalent of about 12 hours a week spread over 8 days and 9 nights. But it's just to say that funding is soft money. There's no hard money. We're now trying to partner with United Way. There's a new format with a few private foundations that are interested in supporting long-term citizen mobilization. And that's because we actually invited some of the funders, United Way and others, to join in the strategic planning process. So they saw the citizens in the forums. They hear the citizens in city council. And those funders are starting to realize that they could fund long-term development rather than just short-term services that you can be accountable for. Mm-hmm. But it's a never-ending challenge.
Right. Well, I think a fantastic answer to a very loaded question, of course, and one that we all grapple with, I think. But I think we need to now wrap up our Q&A. It is already 1:01. So thank you to our listeners. Thank you for sending in those questions. And thank you, Brianne, Alison, and Jean, for your thoughtful answers and for this presentation today. It's been an incredibly informative session, and I know I'm certainly taking away some good learning. So we'll close off with just a few announcements. And we'll, Alison or Brianne, sorry, if you could just switch to the next slide, actually, that'd be great. So, vibrant communities, Vivre Saint Michele was actually one of our original vibrant communities, and it's amazing to see kind of where it started and where it is now, particularly within the VSMS case study. So we want you to invite to stay connected, keep learning about communities just like this who are mobilizing change, particularly around poverty reduction, by subscribing to Vibrant Communities' monthly newsletter. It's called Cities Connect, and the link is there on the screen, and we invite you to also join our online learning community for poverty reduction through our organization website there, vibrantcanada.ca. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, we will be posting a recording of today's broadcast on this website, and we'll be sending it out as well as a PDF copy of the slides in a post-event email, which you'll receive early next week. And on the next slide, we have a couple more upcoming opportunities, learning opportunities that you might be interested in attending. First of all, on Thursday, April 28th, authors John McKnight, Peter Block, and Walter Bruggeman will be hosting a webinar about their new book, Another Kingdom. I encourage you to go to the link at the bottom of the screen there, events.tamarackcommunity.ca, where you'll find links to register for this, as well as the other webinar here, which is called Promise Neighborhoods, happening May 4th with Michael McAfee, who's the Vice President for Programs at PolicyLink, and he's also the co-director of Promise Neighborhoods Institute. So that will be a good one as well. And then on the next slide, we have a bit of information about an upcoming face-to-face workshop happening in Edmonton this June 7th to the 8th, or 7th to the 9th, called Deepening Community. And this is a fantastic event where participants are going to reflect upon core ideas, emerging patterns, innovative programs, and policy priorities, which will enable environments for resident-led community innovation, just like what we talked about today or what we heard about today. So for more information about that, you can register through the link on the screen. We'll send this in an email as well, or you can email my colleague Christy at tamarackcommunity.ca. And with that, we will end off. Thank you so much again for joining us today. And if you have any feedback, please send it to my colleague Natasha at tamarackcommunity.ca, and have a wonderful rest of the day.